There is a new hurricane that just formed in the Atlantic, and it will become a major. But why isn't it being talked about enough? We'll find out next. Alrighty, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Nate, and welcome back to another weather forecast discussion, this time for September 6th, 2023. Now, we might as well get into the main event here, which is Hurricane Lee and what will become Major Hurricane Lee. It is anticipated to rapidly intensify into a major hurricane here pretty soon. We're probably talking about as early as midday on Friday, and it is anticipated to be a high-end Category 4. Could potentially be a Category 5 as it moves on through, but something to still watch out for is notice the cone of uncertainty, all right? Just because we have a lot of these dots here does not mean that's where the center of the storm is going to go. Anywhere within this cone is where the potential center could be, and if this is on the southern end of this cone, then the northeastern portions of the Caribbean could definitely get some tropical storm force winds, maybe some possible flash flooding as well. So definitely something to which the northeastern Caribbean, Puerto Rico, as well as Hispaniola are definitely going to want to watch out for in the coming days. Now, some of the timing here for some of the tropical storm force winds, keep in mind that a lot of these colors are indicative of the probability of it actually happening, which is on the bottom here. And you can see that there is a decent probability that there could be some tropical storm force winds that could enter into the northeastern portions of the Caribbean. So it is going to be something to watch out for, and it could be coming in as early as around midday Friday into late on Friday, and it could probably continue all the way through until this storm officially passes. So something to kind of watch out for is that if this does veer off a little bit further south, then this could be potentially starting to impact people sometime around Friday night. Now we'll take a look at the satellite imagery here. You can clearly see that we have a lot of these clouds that are swirling around the center. Of course, it's going to start to get dark, so you can kind of see how it kind of covers a lot of the satellite, but a lot of explosive convection here near the center, and a lot of very well-defined cirrus clouds, ventilation, if you will. You can see a lot of these feathery cirrus that is starting to spread outwards, and this is basically indicative of some low shear and some very good ventilation. So something really interesting there. If we take a look a little bit, if we actually take a look at the microwave imagery, you can see that this thing is trying to form an eye here. It hasn't completely formed an inner core on the northern side. It will here very soon, however, but it still isn't complete quite yet. It is intensifying quite rapidly for what it's doing right now. But you can still see there's also a lot of thunderstorms even in and around that. Maybe a little bit of dry air here on the backside, but that should be fixed here within a few days. I also wanted to show this little bit of imagery here to kind of show you where the main gist of the significant winds are. And it actually is over here on the northern side. About 50 knot winds here at the northern side, which is definitely tropical storm force. Maximum is at about 68 knots. So that's a little over hurricane force, meaning that this thing definitely is a hurricane as this moves about. We can take a look at the water vapor imagery here across the board, and you can see here is where Lee is at. Lee is currently still a ways away from the Windward Islands, but you can see there's absolutely nothing near it. There's a lot of dry air that is in these dark areas, but notice how large this system actually is. It is actually spanning a lot of its clouds and a lot of its moisture out away from it, meaning that it's going to try and prevent a lot of that dry air from actually getting into the center. So this thing is really going to try and modify its environment and, of course, try to rapidly intensify further. And I mentioned that there's not a whole lot of wind shear, and that's exactly the case. The nearest area where there actually is wind shear is way out in front of it. It's this big trough that's digging on through here, through the southeastern U.S. and the Bahamas, and all the way out towards Bermuda. And out past that, I mean, you can see a little bit of showers and thunderstorms. They are not moving at all, so there realistically isn't a whole lot of shear out in front of this system. I also want to mention the ocean heat content. We've been talking about this a little bit. Of course, if there is more ocean heat content, we can talk about how this system has more heat to work with to try and rapidly intensify. And it's kind of like the energy of tropical systems. So we notice that there is a lot of it. If there's any of this kind of like blue or teal, it's not really too much. And as of right now, this current track takes it over that general area, meaning that it will have a lot of energy to work with over the next 120 hours. And by looking at this, we can take a look at a whole consensus of models and what they think is going to potentially happen with its rapid intensification. It really does believe that over the next 24 hours, we probably could see a significant period of rapid intensification, probably 25 knots in 24 hours, which is a lot. And of course, as you go a little bit further on, you can see that a lot of models continue to see that trend exist even in the latter stages. So maybe 45 knots to 55 knots over the next 36 to 48 hours. And this thing is really expected to really intensify over the open waters. So when we take a look at the model intensity guide, I think it's no surprise when we see that a lot of these models are forecasting this to become a Category 3 major hurricane at minimum. There are some that say it'll be a little bit less than that, but the main consensus is that this thing is going to continue to intensify at a Category 3 or higher at minimum. So definitely something to watch out for, especially if this veers off in one way or another. So what does this mean for areas of North America, the Greater Antilles, Gulf of Mexico, and stuff like that? Well, right now this system's being steered by a high pressure system. It's creating a lot of clockwise flow, and this clockwise flow is actually pushing Lee off near the general vicinity of the northeastern Caribbean, and this will continue to move further and further as this high pressure system continues to slide further and further west. But this high pressure system is also going to be dictated based off of these few troughs that are going to be surging through here in the eastern portions of the United States. And this is where we start to get into some murky water a little bit. The National Hurricane Center knows that this thing is going to be a significant hurricane, but once we get towards a certain point, right around this weekend, that's where uncertainty starts to lie, and they'll have more and more clarity as to when we get closer to this. But we're talking about the mid to the latter stages of next week, into which there could potentially be a trough that can start to dig in here into the southeastern United States. And this is going to create a lot of shear that's going to nudge Lee further and further off towards the north. But what happens after that is it'll depend upon if this high pressure can slide back in and force this thing back west again. And so the one thing that is pretty consistent here is because that trough is digging on through, we can assume that a lot of areas here in the inner portions of the Gulf of Mexico is not going to be impacted at this time. But areas here along the coastline, however, are still going to want to watch, because if this secondary trough that is expected to move on through according to this model does move on through, when will it do so? If it happens a lot sooner, then we can expect that this thing here, Lee, is going to continue to stay out into the open water, and it may not really make impacts until we get towards the eastern portions of Canada. But if this secondary trough that starts to come on through here, which is right about here, this is the secondary trough that really starts to dig down. If this comes even a few days later, the system's going to get very, very close towards the East Coast, and we could potentially be talking about some impacts. So the thing about it is right now is the models don't know. And because the models don't know, people don't know. The National Hurricane Center doesn't know. And so this is where the opposite happens. They don't know. And for right now, because that is the case, people really shouldn't panic about this storm quite yet. We are so far out. We're talking about this system still being open waters in a week from now. We're talking on the 14th. This thing is still supposed to be in the middle of the Atlantic. And so we don't anticipate people to start preparing now, and you shouldn't. Not right now, at least. But it's still more or less kind of, you guys should definitely pay attention. The National Hurricane Center is out there for a reason. They try to make sure that these predictions are spot on for people to try and stay safe. But we also take a look at these certain scenarios here from the models, such as this one. The GFS anticipates maybe this thing starts to move up the coast near the Cape Cod and the southeastern portions of Canada, general vicinity, sometime on the 16th, September the 16th. That would be a Saturday. Meanwhile, the Euro's a lot slower with this thing. You can see that that trough moves through here on the 14th, and it starts to move this thing further and further north. But that secondary trough doesn't start to come in quite yet, and so the Euro nudges this thing a little bit further towards the west. So this is going to be really interesting to see as to when that secondary trough can move on through here sometime around the 15th or the 16th. And if this thing is late by, a day or two, this thing can get pretty close towards the coastline. So something we're going to want to watch out for. Regardless, a lot of the spaghetti models think that this thing's going to be a category 4, especially as it gets north of the Hispaniola and the Puerto Rico areas, as well as east of the Bahamas. So it's at this point, it's really just what happens after this thing. If it decides to go north, it stays out into open waters. If it continues to move off further towards the west, then, we could be talking about things getting a little bit closer. But right now, a lot of the models think that it's going to continue to move off towards the north, and then it'll continue to stay off the coastline up until we get towards the latter stages of next week. So that would be something that we're going to have to watch out for as we get further and further down along the lines. But other than that, realistically speaking, that's what we have for you, all right? Lee is something to watch out for. Don't get me wrong. This thing is supposed to be a major hurricane. This thing could potentially even be a category 5. Could cause some impacts towards areas over here in the northeastern Caribbean. But realistically speaking, for the folks that are in North America, you guys have a lot of time between now and then. A lot of things can happen in the models. Things can change. And of course, we're going to be here to keep you guys updated. So we're going to upload videos every single day. We are now in storm mode. And with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to leave a like. Subscribe if you're new. Turn on notifications. Share this with friends and family and on social media. Also, follow me on social media. Link will be in the description down below. And I will catch you guys tomorrow. So peace out, everyone.